All right. Well, today is Sunday, and tomorrow I have to be in Brooklyn at 6. I have to be there by 6 in a car at 6:30, and on my way out to Long Island for a shoot. Some of you know I'm in film sound. But this is not about my job today. This is going to be about reflections on my vacation. So I have been on vacation for about 2 weeks-ish. Haven't had any job to do, no gigs. This year, I said no to all singing gigs and sat around more or less and played PlayStation 4. Played a lot of Black Ops, a little bit of Mind Rot. And I mean, that's pretty much it. There's nothing really exciting there. Other than just vacation is one of those things that after a while, I think you inevitably it has to end. You can't just be on vacation and play video games every day for 10, 12, 13 hours. It's just not good for your health. But it's fun every so often. I think of it a lot like drinking, partying. You know, if you went to a party every single night, you're eventually going to get burnt out of that. And the same goes with going to the bar. But I think you'd also need that perspective to, as an artist, be able to gather your energy and create something. And on that note, I have done an audition recently and got a little side role. I'll be doing Goro in Madame Butterfly, which is cool. I don't know it at all. Starting today, I don't know it. I got in. They said I was good. The first rehearsal that I'm able to go to is in 2 weeks, so I will be prepping to. What was it? 2 weeks? Well, it's more like a week and 10 days. I'm gonna try to learn the role in 10 days essentially, and somehow do that while on a film set for 14 hours a day for the next 5. So I have essentially a couple days to just listen to the music on my travels, bore it into my head whilst working through the libretto, so I know my words. Oh man, I wonder if I should do an episode where I talk about how to work through an opera score, or at least my process. That could be interesting. I was really wanting to reflect on my vacation because I think it's very important to do that. I found myself, and yesterday I talked a little bit about it, or was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday I talked a little bit about it. And talked about how one can get depressed and not really want to do more towards their artistic endeavors because they get down about it. And I was talking to a friend of mine about that, and it sounds like depression, where you're sad about being sad, and because you're sad, you don't want to do anything, which causes you to be more sad. It's very cyclical. But I think it's a necessary process. We all are expected by the world around us to be happy every day, to start out the new year good. But I think at some point, you just have to not have a good day. You need to have a bad day. You need to be really, really down and just really want to hide away from the world, I totally get that. You can't be happy all the time. I don't think it's realistic for your mental health to always be happy. Some people, when they're unhappy, they'll take a bunch of pills or a bunch of drugs, or they go drink alcohol all the time, but to try to numb it out, I guess. But I think that you need to feel that deeply. You need to feel that depression deeply. You don't want to leave your apartment. You don't want to leave your room. And I think that gives you perspective. It allows you to, when things start going up and and things go well, you have something to look back upon. And you can say, oh, well, you know what? I'm here and it's a great place. And I know how great it is because I've been in the moments when it's not so. Well, I've been in the moments when it's not so. It's not always going to be rainbows and sunshine. So yeah, I don't know know if I'll be able to do a whole lot of blogging over the next 5 days because it's a pretty intense work schedule, but I'm sure I'll see if I can come on for a little bit, maybe talk about the set, talk about the people I meet, experiences, so on and so forth. So for now, I'll give you another story time. Aunt Glasspan was nearly 70 when she became guardian to Lexington. But to look at her, you would never have guessed it for 1 minute. She was sprightly as a woman half her age, with a small, wrinkled, but still quite beautiful face and 2 lovely brown eyes that sparkled at you in the nicest way. She was also a spinster, though you would never have guessed that either, for there was nothing spinsterish about Aunt Glasspan. She was never bitter or gloomy or irritable. She didn't have a mustache, and she wasn't in the least bit jealous of other people, which in itself is something you can seldom say about either a spinster or a virgin lady. Although, of course, it is not known for certain whether Aunt Glasspan qualified on both accounts. But she was an eccentric old woman. There was no doubt about that. For the past 30 years, she had lived a strange, isolated life all by herself in a tiny cottage high up on the slopes of Blue Ridge Mountains, several miles from the nearest village. She had 5 acres of pasture, a plot for growing vegetables, a flower garden, 3 cows, a dozen hens, and a fine cockerel. And now she had little Lexington as well. She was a strict vegetarian and regarded the consumption of animal flesh as not only unhealthy and disgusting, but horribly cruel. She lived upon lovely clean foods like milk, butter, eggs, cheese, vegetables, nuts, herbs, and fruit, and she rejoiced in the conviction that no living creature would be slaughtered on her account, not even a shrimp. Once, when a hen of hers passed away in the prime of life from being egg-bound, Aunt Glasspan was so distressed that she nearly gave up egg-eating altogether. She knew not the first thing about babies, but that didn't worry her in the least. At the railway station in New York, while waiting for the train that would take her and Lexington back to Virginia, she bought 6 feeding bottles, 2 dozen diapers, a box of safety pins, a carton of milk for the journey, and a small paper-covered book called The Care of Infants. What more could anyone want? And when the train got going, she fed the baby some milk, changed its nappies for fashion, and laid it down on the seat to sleep. Then she read The Care of Infants from cover to cover. "There is no problem here," she said, throwing the book out the window. No problem at all. And curiously enough, there wasn't. Back home in the cottage, everything went just as smoothly as could be. Little Lexington drank his milk and belched and yelled and slept exactly as a good baby should. And Aunt Glasspan glowed with joy whenever she looked at him and showered him with kisses all day long. Little Lexington drank his milk and belched and yelled and slept exactly as a good baby should, and Aunt Glasspan glowed with joy whenever she looked at him and showered him with kisses all day long. By the time he was 6 years old, young Lexington had grown into a most beautiful boy with long golden hair and deep blue eyes the color of cornflowers. He was bright and cheerful, and already he had learned to help his old aunt in all sorts of different ways around the property, collecting the eggs from the chicken house, turning the handle of the butter churn, digging up potatoes in the vegetable garden, and searching for wild herbs on the side of the mountain. Soon, Aunt Glasspan told herself she would have to start thinking about his education. But she couldn't bear the thought of sending him away to school. She loved him so much now that it would kill her to be parted from him for any length of time. There was, of course, that village school down the valley, but it was a dreadful-looking place, and if she sent him there, she just knew that they would start forcing him to eat meat the very first day he arrived. "You know what, my darling," she said to him one day when he was sitting on a stool in the kitchen watching her make cheese, "I don't see why I shouldn't give you your lessons myself." The boy looked up at her with his large blue eyes and gave her a lovely, trusting smile. "That would be nice," he said. "And the very first thing I should do would be to teach you how to cook." "I think I would like that, Aunt Glasspan." "Whether you like it or not, you're going to have to learn sometime," she said. "Vegetarians like us don't have nearly so many foods to choose from as ordinary people, and therefore they must learn to doubly expert with what they have." "Aunt Glasspan," the boy said, "what do ordinary people eat that we don't?" "Animals," she answered, tossing her head in disgust. "You mean live animals?" "No," she said, "dead ones." The boy considered this for a moment. "You mean When they die, they eat them instead of burying them? They don't wait for them to die, my pet. They kill them. How do they kill them, Aunt Glasspan? They usually slit their throats with a knife. But what kind of animals? Cows and pigs mostly, and sheep. Cows? The boy cried. You mean like Daisy and Snowdrop and Lily? Exactly, my dear. But how do you eat them, Aunt Glasspan? They cut them up into bits and they cook the bits. They like it best when it's all red and bloody and sticking to the bones. They love to eat lumps of cow's flesh with the blood oozing out of it. Pigs, too? They adore pigs. Lumps of bloody pig's meat? The boy said. Imagine that. What else do they eat, Aunt Glasspan? Chickens. Chickens? Millions of them. Feathers and all? No, dear, not the feathers. Now run along outside and get Aunt Glasspan a bunch of chives. Will you, my darling? Shortly after that, the lessons began. They covered 5 subjects: reading, writing, geography, arithmetic, and cooking. But the latter was by far the most popular with both teacher and pupil. In fact, it very soon became apparent that young Lexington possessed a truly remarkable talent in this direction. He was a born cook. He was dexterous and quick. He could handle his pans like a juggler. He could slice a single potato in 20 paper-thin slivers in less time than it took his aunt to peel it. His palate was exquisite, sensitive, and he could taste a pot of strong onion soup and immediately detect the presence of a single tiny leaf of sage. In so young a boy, all this was a bit bewildering to Aunt Glasspan, and to tell the truth, she didn't quite know what to make of it. But she was proud as proud could be all of the same, and predicted a brilliant future for the child. What a mercy it is, she said, that I have such a wonderful little fellow to look after me in my dotage. And after a couple years later, she retired from the kitchen for good, leaving Lexington in sole charge of all household cooking. The boy was now 10 years old, and Aunt Glasspan was nearly 80. With the kitchen to himself, Lexington straightway began experimenting with dishes of his own invention. The old favorites no longer interested him. He had a violent urge to create. There were hundreds of fresh ideas in his head. I will begin, he said, by devising a chestnut soufflé. He made it and served it up for supper that very night. It was terrific. You are a genius, Aunt Glasspan cried, leaping up from her chair and kissing him on both cheeks. You will make history. From then on, hardly a day went by without some new, delectable creation set upon the table. There was Brazilian nut soup, hominy cutlets, vegetable ragout, dandelion omelet, cream cheese fritters, stuffed cabbage surprise, stewed fromage, shallots à la bonne femme, beetroot mousse piquant, prunes stroganoff, Dutch rarabi, turnips on horseback, flaming spruce needle tans, and many, many other beautiful compositions. Never before in her life, Aunt Glasspan declared, had she tasted such food as this. And in the mornings, long before lunch was due, she would go out on the porch and sit there in her rocking chair, speculating about the coming meal, licking her chops, sniffing the aromas that came wafting out through the kitchen window. "What's that you're making in there today, boy?" she would call out. "Try to guess, Aunt Glasspan." "Smells like a bit of salsify fritters to me," she would say, sniffing vigorously. Then out he would come, this 10-year-old child, a little grin of triumph on his face, and in his hands a big steaming pot of the most heavenly stew made entirely of parsnips and lovage. "You know what you ought to do?" his aunt said to him, gobbling this stew. "You ought to set yourself down this very minute with paper and pencil and write a cooking book." He looked out across the table, chewing his parsnips slowly. "Why not?" she cried. "I've taught you how to write, and I've taught you how to cook and flow. All you've got to do is put the two things together. You write a cooking book, my darling, and it'll make you famous the whole world over." "All right," he said. "I will." And that very day, Lexington began writing the first page of that monumental work which was to occupy him for the rest of his life. He called it Eat Good and Healthy. 7 years later, by the time he was 17, he had recorded over 9,000 different recipes, all of them original and all of them delicious. But now, suddenly, his labors were interrupted by the tragic death of Aunt Glasspan. She was afflicted in the night by a violent seizure, and Lexington, who had rushed into her bedroom to see what all the noise was about, found her lying on her bed, yelling and cussing and twisting herself into all manner of complicated knots. Indeed, she was a terrible sight to behold, and the agitated youth danced around her in his pajamas, wringing his hands and wondering what on earth he should do. Finally, in an effort to cool her down, he fetched a bucket of water from the pond in the cowfield and tipped it over her head, but this only intensified the paroxysms, and the old lady expired within the hour. "This is really too bad," the poor boy said, pinching her several times to make sure that she was dead. "And how sudden! How quick and sudden! Why, only a few hours ago she seemed in the very best of spirits. She even took 3 large helpings of my most recent creation, deviled mushroom burgers, and told me how succulent it was." After weeping bitterly for several minutes, for he had loved his aunt very much, he pulled himself together and carried her outside and buried her behind the cowshed. The next day, while tidying up her belongings, he came across an envelope that was addressed to him in Aunt Glasspan's handwriting. He opened it and drew out 2 $50 bills and a letter. "Darling boy," the letter said, "I know that you have never yet been down the mountain since you were 13 days old. But as soon as I die, you must put on a pair of shoes and a clean shirt and walk down to the village and find a doctor. Ask the doctor to give you a death certificate to prove that I am dead. Then take the certificate to my lawyer, a man called Mr. Samuel Zuckerman, who lives in New York City and who has a copy of my will. Mr. Zuckerman will arrange everything. The cash in this envelope is to pay the doctor for the certificate and to cover the cost of your journey to New York. Mr. Zuckerman will give you more money when you get there, and it is my earnest wish that you use it to further your researches into culinary and vegetarian matters, and that you continue to work upon that great book of yours until you are satisfied that it is complete in every way. Your loving Aunt, Glasspan." Lexington, who had always done everything as Aunt told him to, pocketed the money, put on a pair of shoes and a clean shirt, and went down the mountain to the village where the doctor lived. "Old Glasspan?" the doctor said. "My God, is she dead?" "Certainly she's dead," the youth answered. "If you will come back home with me now, I'll dig her up and you can see for yourself." "How deep did you bury her?" the doctor asked. 6 or 7 feet down, I should think." "And how long ago?" "Oh, about 8 hours." "Then she's dead," the doctor announced. "Here's the certificate." Once again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, comment, like, give me an idea. Maybe I'll read another story. If you have a story, send it in to me. Maybe I'll read your story. There's always options, you know. But have a good one, and vacation's over. Enjoy the new year. 2018, here we come.